Welcome to Inkwell Spoken Presents Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny. I am your host, Reggie Key, and today my distinguished guest is Ron Harvey. Ron, thanks for being on the show.
Appreciate you, Reggie. Thank you for the invite and super excited about supporting the work that you're doing.
I'm excited about it too, brother. We'll be traveling to Charleston next week for a conference. I'm excited to hear your expertise at large, and I'm excited to connect with some people down there that can get this message out to the masses as I envision it. So I thank you for seeing a little bit of the value in what we talked about briefly. So I want you to get the full extent of the value that we have here in this content and in this book that I've written. And so in doing so, I want to start us off by asking you, Ron, do you consider yourself to be a genius?
Yeah, challenging because of this is one of the things I don't know if I would consider. I think other people may consider me a genius, but because of my humble nature and growing up in a way that you just never toot your own horn, I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't. I think I do some things really, really well that people count on. Would I attach the word genius to it? I'm not sure if I will attach genius to it. I don't think I'm really good at it, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it would be uncomfortable to attach genius to it because it's like an Einstein type stuff. So I don't know if I would say I'm a genius. I think I'm really good at what I do, but I would be a little bit more humble than before I attach genius to it.
All right, I appreciate that. You said a lot in that little bit of a response, and I appreciate it. One, you mentioned Einstein. We're going to touch on him later. But two, the humility of it, you know, there's something powerful about being able to self-affirm. And
Yeah.
to self-affirm with this label, to identify with this label is not to go around and introduce yourself accordingly. Like, I don't know if you remember the cartoon back in the day, but Looney Tunes was my jam back in the day. And it was the Road Runner. And if you remember Wile E. Coyote, sometimes he would introduce himself. People like, Wile E. Coyote, super genius. He would have his card out. And I'm not saying that we're to walk around with this card and have the genius underneath the label, but you can understand this specifically as an African-American male that has existed in America for, I assume, your entire life. There are labels that people try to put on us to make their world make sense. That's called discrimination, and there's prejudice. And when we don't know enough of who we are, we may begin to acquiesce to labels that reduce our impact, that reduce our potential down for the sake of somebody else making sense of us and who we are. And so when I encounter youth a lot, and even adults who might not have the highest self-esteem, I try to get them to associate to this label so that when somebody else comes with anything lesser than that, they don't accept it. I got to get them to see it for themselves so that they know that they have value. They know that they have content to be contributed to the rest of the world. So yeah, there's a balance, right? There's a definite balance.
Yes.
Most of us, when we think of humility, we think of the aspect of, hey, don't think too highly of yourself. But then the other side of humility is not thinking too lowly of yourself either.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think
And
that's for
so,
me when you're asking me that question. I think I'm really good at a lot of things. And I think I add a lot of value and I think people appreciate me. And I think a part of that, when I walk into the room, there are some things I do better than a lot of people. And there are some things I don't do better than a lot of people. So I do think in that space that I want to be seen and acknowledged for what I bring to the table and the value that I add. So for me, I'm pretty confident in those things. And the things I don't know, I actually want to put people around me that's really good at it.
yes, see, you in it. You are in it with me, because the thing about genius is not saying that you're good at all things. The thing about genius is knowing, what the world calls another name that the world calls that I think you feel more comfortable with is a SBE, a subject matter expert, right?
Yes.
Subject matter experts aren't good at all things. They're not all knowing. And that's the same with genius. One of my early guests, he said that, hey, look, I have zeros and nines. And he was like, the things that I do really well, I'll give myself a 9. I won't give myself a 10 because then that begins to get arrogant. And it also doesn't leave any room for improvement. But he said the places that I'm not good at, I rate myself as a 0. And perhaps you can learn it and get better. But when we all begin to recognize what we can contribute and we see where our zeros and nines are, it also begins to show us where we can connect. Like, hey, where I have a 0, you're a 9, and vice versa. We can come together and do a thing that individually we could not do, because we recognize, hey, you're a genius at that, I'm a genius at this. Together, we can bring something together that, like I said, can't be done separately. And so that's an important part of where we're going today and the discussion that we're going to have is knowing where your zeros and nines are and being comfortable knowing that it's what you've been put on this planet to do, which is what we're calling genius.
Yes. Okay.
So, and so we're beginning to break down this word because there are some connotations that we have that we've been conditioned to think of genius in a certain way. And I'm here to kind of break that down and redefine it according to three elements, which we'll discuss momentarily. So
Okay.
you've already given a name, but I still want to ask this question explicitly to you. Who comes to mind when you hear this word genius? You said Einstein. Is that like the first person that comes to mind for you?
I think it's come to mind because, studies in school and who you've seen in books, but also think, there are other people that fit into the bracket of that as well. So I look at a Dr. King at his young age and what he
Yes.
achieved and how smart he was and what he saw before anybody else saw it. So I would attribute that to, people that are also in that space that do things that's just not everyday occurrences at his age, where he had a degree and he was running the church, but also into politics and and doing religion and family. I mean, he just did a lot of stuff at his age that just, for me, I see as super brilliant. Really good at what he does, and he stayed in the space of what he did. What he did. I mean, he didn't try to be everything to everybody. I mean, he
Right.
did what he did really, really well.
I agree. But as many people as I've been in front of with this workshop, one-on-one interviews, where I'm conducting it with like 20, 30, 100 people, the number one name is Einstein. He always comes up. And I find it interesting, especially among people of color, that the first person that comes to mind is someone who we don't even look like. And so there begins to be this disassociation that happens. As we
Yeah.
attribute genius to an Einstein, we put him on a pedestal, which rightly so in physics, he deserves to be on a pedestal. But we also put this genius on a pedestal that's just out of reach for us to be able to grasp it for ourselves.
Yes.
But what I've seen interesting happen, Ron, is as I've done the one-on-one interviews, the people who are more inclined to answer yes, definitively, I am a genius, when I ask them who it is that they see around them or who comes to mind, it's always someone that they can relate to. I've heard for the ones that say yes, when I ask them who they think of their parents. I had one guest think of their daughter, and it'll be someone within their sphere of influence that looks like them. And I think that's an important thing to recognize when you attribute genius to somebody that you have attributes the same, that you have similar features as. You're more likely inclined to say like, yeah, I see it in them, and so I can see it in me too.
Yes. Yeah.
And
And I think
I
that's
don't know, how you see yourself, but I don't look like Einstein at all. So if we're not careful in how we attribute things and associate, we can end up disqualifying ourselves subconsciously from that mantle. But you're about to say something.
Yeah, I think a part of it is for me is taught lessons. So, early on, things that you were taught and who was in the books and you studied, that was super smart. Then there was part of the experiences of who I was around and educated by outside of the academic space that I also see as genius. So when it comes to mine, I mean, for me, I look in so many different levels in my life of where I picked up what I know and what I've learned. And I've learned it from people, um, from academics that look like me and that didn't look like me, but also learn from the world people that look like me that don't look like me. And I was afforded the opportunity of serving in the armed forces, which allowed me to see people from all
Oh,
walks
yeah.
of life. That gave me a different perspective other than just the community that I grew up in. So I think I was afforded opportunity to see people like me at high levels, that were really, really good at what they do. And so I was
Yeah.
afforded the opportunity to be exposed to those people. But I also have a religious background. So my grandfather was brilliant, built the church, raised a family, and wasn't the most educated guy, but was super smart and good at what he did.
And I like that you said that. So I see you're a good guest. All of my guests are good, but I like they're reviving because you're picking up on some things that I want to make sure to specify. When I tell people about this workshop and the content, I always make sure to remind them or to put it up front that when I talk about genius, I'm talking about non-academic genius. So you said it. You said, hey, my grandfather, he didn't get a chance to go and finish. Did he finish high school?
Yeah, finished high school, but no college education.
No college. And we have to begin to understand and disassociate from like, hey, genius is associated to college. There are
Yeah.
some who find their genius in college, but there's plenty others who don't get that recognition, who found their genius outside of college, who found their genius without even getting a high school degree. It's possible, because another thing that you mentioned about your experience in the military, a lot of what we attribute to genius is about exposure.
Yes.
And so you can be exposed to a thing that somebody else isn't exposed to that gives you a competitive edge, a learning edge, but that doesn't mean that you're a genius. I'll give you, this is my first example. I don't normally give this example, but I feel like it fits. In 5th or 6th grade, I was moved from a private Christian school to a public school because my sister graduated and I could no longer go to the Christian school that she was going to. And so I had to go to my neighborhood school. And so I got picked on mercilessly when I got into public school because I was different. I didn't mind being the answering the questions in class and this, that, and the other. So I had a really rough transitional year. But I remember this one time we played a trivia game and they were asking, trivia questions. And so one of the questions was, what holiday is Auld Lang Syne sang for? And everybody was like, blank. And I was like, New Year's Eve. And my friends, well, they weren't really my friends yet, but they was looking at me like, dude, how do you even know that? Like, who are you? And they began to attribute, they're like, man, this dude is a genius. And I remember at the 5th grade level, I was like, no, don't ascribe that to me. One, because I don't want you to beat me up later. But two, I was like, look, let me explain to you why I know that. I wasn't born with this knowledge of Auld Lang Syne. At my house, we had this programmable doorbell ringer, right? You could program 26 different themes to your doorbell and it would ring. And I was the only one that really took an interest in it. So I was the shortest one in the house, but it was like the highest up. So I would go pull this chair up and go through they were all listed A through Z. And I would go through and look at each of them and play the tune and be like, okay, I want this tune for this holiday and this tune for it. But some of the tunes I didn't recognize by name. So guess what? When I got to this thing and I was like, what is Auld Lang Syne? But I pressed it. I said, oh, that's New Year's. And I knew from just that exposure what that was, and I locked it in. So I told him that story. I was like, it's not that I'm smarter than you. It's just that I got exposed to something that you weren't exposed to. And so that's an important part of this unraveling, this unlocking of our genius within us, is exposure.
Yes.
So
awesome.
I want to expose you to something. It's a quote, all right, that really can govern it and launch us into the next phase of this interview. And it purportedly comes from Einstein himself. Einstein knew a little something more than just physics and the stars and astronomy. Purportedly, this comes from him. So you ready for the quote?
Yes.
So I want you to, once I say it, I need to know 2 things from you. 1, if you've heard it before, and then 2, how it hits you. How do you internalize it? And then we can discuss it, okay?
Okay.
Here it goes. If you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, it'll spend its entire life thinking it's stupid.
Never heard it.
All right, cool. So you got exposed to something new today. Now,
yes.
What does that do? Like, how are you processing that? How are you breaking that down? What does it mean to you?
Well, when you said a fish and climbing a tree, and I'm thinking of a fish and what it really does, and it doesn't climb trees, it made me realize that you can probably teach anything. You can probably teach anyone or anything something that if you wanted to expose them to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it dealt with more of you learn what you get exposed to, and it doesn't always have to fit to what the world says that it really is.
Okay. So it's about these labels again. Like, hey,
yes,
this is what you were born into, but you can be exposed to something different and then have an advantage that you didn't have before. But in the case of this fish, though, I like what you said at the beginning. You was like, fish, that's not its natural environment. Its natural environment is water, right?
Yes.
But when you take this fish out of its environment, out of its natural element, and try to make it do something else, what's going to happen if a fish is out of water for too long?
It won't survive.
It won't survive. It's going to die. And so we have been conditioned, the majority of us have been conditioned to be taken out of our element, never return to it, and then do a thing that we were never built to do. Fish have gills, scales, fins, and they're streamlined for water. So if you want to see a fish in its genius element, put it in the water and try and keep up with it. You're not going to be able to. I don't care who the fastest swimmer in the world is. When you put a fish in its element, you're going to see it shine. You're going to see what it was designed to do. And so the thing that genius begins to explore is, what is your natural element? what is the thing that you were put on this planet to do, that you were designed to do? And so the only way to really begin to tap into that is to get into these three components that I'm redefining genius by. Those three components being passion, talent, and purpose. Okay. So to me, Ron, when I look around, I see a bunch of fish out of water. I see dying genius all around me. And I feel like I've been called to revitalize, resuscitate, and resurrect the dying genius that I see around me. A lot of people actually, Ron, have touched on or are operating in their genius. It just takes somebody outside of them to say, hey, you know what you're doing is special, right? In the case of this fish in this quote that's now a metaphor for genius,
Yes.
I feel like there's this person off camera that you can't see. I have a vision of what this looks like. And in the vision, two things are off camera. To the left of this tree with this fish at its root is the water. And it's relatively close to the fish, closer than it realizes. And to the right, there's this person that's barking at this fish like, have you climbed this tree yet? That's just conditioning this fish to do a thing that it wasn't designed to do. That is, it goes back to what I talked about, African Americans getting labels put on them to do a thing that's not necessarily what I was built to do. Do you even know who I am before you go put this label on me? I don't know anybody, Ron, on this planet that could see a fish and not know that it belongs in water, except, when it's about to get eaten, right?
Yes.
You see a fish, you know this thing belongs in water. But what we've done historically, I feel like, is judge a people or judge a person by our standards instead of trying to understand what their standards are and making sure that we put them in an environment where their standards will allow them to thrive.
Yeah, for me, I think that that's relevant, but also I've been trained because of military experiences that you put people in a place where they have the best opportunity to be successful. And so that's something that I've over years have learned through military training. And for the military to be the one of the best militaries on the face of the planet is you really leverage we intentionally create space for people to be great. Yeah. And so I've learned that over the years is what is it that I know about you that I can put you in a space to be smart, to be intelligent, to look great, to win with just who you are versus what I need you to be. So I've been trained really, well on how to do that. So I do that in my company as well, is how do I put you in a space of, we do use the SME, so that will resonate better than genius, where you're a subject matter expert at, that you can actually help us win. So that's something I'm very familiar with and very comfortable with. When I'm walking into the room, there are things I am a subject matter expert at. And so I can do that real easy.
I have to correct myself. Earlier, I said SBE, even though I said the acronym correctly, SME,
Yes.
SME. Yes. Sorry about that.
Yes.
I like this how you're bringing in the military, because not only are there several branches of the military to help you figure out where you best shine, there's different departments too. And one of the ways to figure out your genius is just to try different things, exposing yourself to different things. And you may fail a few times before you catch on to, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. And the thing that I think a lot of us fear, and actually we'll get into this in a minute, we hate failure so much that we're denying ourselves the opportunity to learn about ourselves in the failure. Because I see failure as it's the first attempt in learning. And it's not a fail as long as you learn from it.
Yes. Yeah, and I see failure for me, I see failure as an opportunity to grow. I mean, I think a lot of people see failure as an enemy, and I see failure as more of a friend to help me get better at what I'm trying to do. I think what helps me stay, a subject matter expert is I think I don't call it failure. I think I call them expensive lessons learned.
Okay.
Yeah, because if I didn't learn anything, then I consider it to be failure. But if I just learned one thing to do it differently, then it was an expensive lesson. And I've had expensive lessons, whether it's time or resources or finances or relationships. I mean, I've learned from a lot of that stuff, and I call those expensive lessons learned. It's just like going to college. College is an expensive lesson to learn. It's financially expensive to learn it, but so is life. So I think my life, my experiences through life where I didn't achieve or get the A the first time were great expensive lessons that I've learned.
Yeah. One of, I was that guy who excelled really well in high school, but I wasn't arrogant with it. I would help my friends. Like if I saw them struggling, I would help them. But one of the friends that I had, that I helped her with Spanish, math, a couple of different things. When she got to college, she excelled better than me because she was used to failing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
got to college and my stuff kind of tanked because I was like, I don't know I don't know how to handle failure. When it started, when physics ironically knocked me on my tail, I was like, I don't know how to get up from this. I've never been hit like this before. But my friend knows. She was like, yeah, she knew, okay, when this happens, then I go get the resources and I go talk to the right person. She knew what to do to rebound from the fail. And so she was a better student than me in college because of that. And people have to see that for themselves. And so even as we begin to talk about passion, talent, and purpose, I always describe it like a puzzle. I mean, it's only a 3-piece puzzle, so that should be easy to put together. But when we begin to unpack what each of these means, it'll take some time to see how they fit to unlock your genius. And it's okay because most people have several passions and at least one or two talents. And so to figure out how to make them work and how to get them to come together to unlock your genius is going to take a fail a couple times. And it's okay
absolutely.
as long as you learn from it.
Yeah, and I think that's important for me as I think of like whether I show up best. I've been doing it long enough now where I've learned, coping mechanisms, and I've learned how to have resiliency, so I can bounce back pretty quick. I totally agree with, even for our kids, I want them to kind of have some level of disappointment early on,
Mm-hmm.
so they don't become adults and all of a sudden they don't have the ability to recover from it. So
Yeah.
I want them to have some level of disappointment, or not necessarily, I don't call it failure, but I don't want them to achieve the highest marks all their life. And then when they finally get it, they're 40 years old and they don't know how to survive. They go into depression because they've never seen failure before.
Yeah. That happened to me at age 19 and 20. And
Yeah.
thank God I was able to rebound. I don't know why I said rebound the way I did, but
Yes.
rebound from it. So that's important. So thank you for bringing that up too, the resiliency. So let's get into this first component of this genius equation that's in my book, and that's the focus of this
Okay.
passion. What word or words come to mind when you hear this word passion?
For me, it's what gets me going. That'll make me show up even if I'm not getting paid for it.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So I've said the same thing. For 10 years, I went and took this message to a high school, and I just wanted to get in front of the students and get it in their hearing and get it in their understanding. This high school didn't pay me though. It was volunteer. And I would
Yes.
early on, I would tell them, like, when you tap into this passion, you will do it for free until someone sees your zeal for it so and appreciates it so much that they will compensate you for it.
Yes.
But you don't go out and do a thing just because you're looking for the compensation. I went to college looking for the compensation. I
Yes.
majored in engineering, and I'm not even doing that anymore because it
Yes.
wasn't engaging my passion. So I agree with what you're saying. You know what the number one answer is for passion that I hear? It's
No. Say again.
love. So people,
Yeah.
associate, contribute. We begin to dictate to students. We love to ask them questions and then answer the question for them. So we'll start to ask middle schoolers and high schoolers, "Hey man, what do you want to do with your life?" And before they can really get it out their mouth, you know what? Whatever you do, just do what you love. And my feeling on that, Ron, is, you know what? Love is important, but save love for marriage. When you want to begin to tap into your passion, the thing that's going to drive you and propel you forward, you should actually come from the exact opposite end of the spectrum of love, which is to focus on what you hate.
Mm.
Yeah, this is different. Now, I
Yeah.
can't take credit for this concept. I read a book by this gentleman called Mike Murdoch called The Assignment. And he said, hey, look, if you want to figure out what you've been put on this planet to do, which is what he called your assignment, you need to figure out what it is that you hate. And here's why. He said, when you begin to identify the thing that you hate, you're identifying something in the planet that's broken. Now, Ron, would you agree that the world is broken?
Absolutely.
I haven't seen any fish trying to climb trees in real life, but I tell you what, the past 2 or 3 years have been really crazy. But if I see that, Ron, I know it's time to get off the planet. If I see a fish in a tree, I know the world is broken beyond repair and it's time to go someplace else. But until then, there's a lot of other components that are broken that lets us know that there's work to be done. The thing of it is, Ron, the brokenness that affects you is different than the brokenness that affects me. The trauma that I experienced as a child is different from the trauma that you experienced, but it informs us. And when we begin to survive and come out of that trauma, we look back at it like, you know what, I hate that I had to go through that. That made me feel like a fish out of water. That made me feel like I didn't belong. That made me feel less than who I believe I'm destined to be. And so when we begin to survive and look back and understand why we've gone through what we've been through, that was a trauma to us. When we look around us, Ron, and see it afflicting other people and still operating and hurting people, we were like, you know what, I hate that though. And we may begin to say things, Ron, like, you know what, somebody should do something about that. And we may begin to talk about it to our friends and our family whenever we see it operating, to the point where our family is like, oh, don't let Ron see that. He's gonna go off. Like if he sees that, he's gonna start to talk about it, and you're not gonna be able to shut him up for an hour, right? And so the thing of it is, if we find ourselves saying somebody should do something about that, somebody should do something about that, guess who the actual somebody is? It's you. You're seeing a thing that makes your skin crawl, that really rubs you the wrong way. And the next person, you might even say, like, I don't bother you. And they're like, no, it doesn't, because they weren't traumatized by it the way it traumatized you, or they weren't impacted by it in a way that impacts you to the point where you feel motivated to do something about it, whether you're paid for it or not. You'll go address it. And most of the time, Ron, the thing that traumatizes us, it's never something small. It's something big. It's something systemic in society, in our community, in our schools, that has burdened us to the place where we're like, I have to do something, whether I speak about it, whether I chip away at it, or whether I take it away in chunks, I got to do something about it. And you won't care how big the thing is. You'll just know that, hey man, like I like to call it, it's the gas in your tank. That gas in your tank will either bring you through it, over it, or around it, but it's going to get you to it. And you're not going to run away from it. It's your David and Goliath moment, if you will. If you get what I mean when I say that.
Yes, I do. Mhm. Yeah, I think when I think about passion, how to get through things, I think for me, it allows me to at least get up and start moving and building momentum.
Yes.
Yeah, for me, it's the thing that gets me going, so I have a chance to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of passion, there are a lot of things that I enjoy doing, but it's not always a passion. But the things that I'm really passionate about, I don't necessarily need someone to wake me up to do it, or encourage me to do it, or motivate me to do it, or inspire me. It's the thing that I get joy out of doing, because it's just the thing that I get joy out of doing.
Yeah. Like for David, when everybody else was running from Goliath, he was like,
let me slay you.
let me, I got something for him. Let me get at him. He ran towards him, right? It hit him different than it hit everybody else. And so not other people will share our passion, but they won't share our talent. And so that's going to get us into talent in a second. But I want to pause for a second, because I want to make sure to explain this passion a little further, because hate is a strong word. And a lot of people are uncomfortable when I first say it. But when I get in front of students that are reluctant to talk, guess what they talk about when I begin to ask them? If I ask them what they hate, oh, they got answers for me.
Yeah, they got a lot of answers. Yes.
They got a lot of answers when I get, especially teenagers, they're like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, I want to hear it. Now, let me give you a really good example of this. I was asked by a principal to come to an elementary school, and she was like, look, I got these 10 little boys. They were all minorities. She was like, look, I just need somebody that they can relate to, that looks like them. Can you just come every Friday and talk to them and just encourage them? I said, absolutely. I was workshopping this whole genius thing. And so when I got to the school and I sat down after a little while, I said, you know what? I want to talk to you guys about genius. And I was like, each of you is a genius. And Ron, their reaction was stereotypical, right? Because they were like, who are you talking to? It was like, I'm not. Matter of fact, some of them got offended that I even put that on them, because, Ron, they were used to these negative affirmations. Hey, look, you have ADD, you have ADHD, you are disruptive in class, you are emotionally imbalanced, you need medication. All these negative affirmations and labels they had gotten accustomed to, so that when I put a positive one on them that was going to lead them to be accountable for something, they balked at it.
Yes.
They were more familiar. They were more used. And matter of fact, they started roasting one another like in the same breath. And they were more comfortable tearing each other down than me building them up. So I said, okay, you don't receive that. That's fine. And I said, but here's where I got them. I said, hey, look, though, can you tell me what you hate, though? And Ron, these 10 little boys that can never agree on anything, what to play, what game to play, when to play, whose seat was what, they all agreed and said universally that they hated the same thing. And that thing, that system that was traumatizing them was school. It was like, we hate school, Mr. Key, now what? And I said, oh, do you? And at first I said, you know what? It's okay. I'm glad that you felt comfortable saying that to me, because I can understand why you feel like you hate school, because you come into a place every day that makes you feel like you don't belong. You come into a place that makes you feel like a fish out of water. You come into a place where literally you do feel like you're dying because nobody is affirming you in anything positive. You're marginalized. And I'm not using all these words, but they're marginalized to the point where they're like, I hate going to school, because they know what they're going to experience day after day. Right. And so they, you know, I remember being in the class and feeling a certain way when all the other kids would be moving around. You could see them in the classroom and they would look through the window at us. And I felt it. I was like, ooh, I feel like they're judging us though. Like, oh, they don't belong. Right. And so I said, I get that you say you hate school, but I was like, let me tell you what you're telling me by you all universally agreeing that school is something that you hate. Because I told them, if in fact what I'm telling you is true, that you will put on this planet to fix the thing that you hate, then I told them, you're all telling me that you're future educators. And they got real, they started to back away from me. They was looking at me on the side. I was like, no, like, come closer. Let me really explain to you what you just said to me. And I said, look, there are 8 different learning styles, but at most schools only teach from 3. And so if you don't speak that one of those 3 learning styles, then you're going to be made to feel like you don't belong, like you're slow, like you learn different. This is true, but you learn different in a way that's not acceptable and it's not cool. And it's never explicitly said, but they're getting left behind. And so those 3 learning styles are verbal learners, visual learners, and the left brain thinker, the logical reason thinker, the person who responds to math. Like, I love math. I'm a left brain thinker. But what if you're a right brain thinker? You're creative. In fact, time out for a second. Einstein, I believe he was a right brain thinker, or he may have been both, but he had some right brain thinking qualities about him. I don't know if you've done a lot of research on Einstein, but when he was younger, while he was still in secondary school, he got a note home. His parents got a note home that said, hey, look, you might want to make sure Einstein work with his hands, because he's not picking up what we're putting down in the classroom. He's not that bright. Can you believe that the guy who we attribute to genius at an early age was told, you don't fit in here, you don't think like us? And if he had acquiesced to that, we would have been robbed of one of the greatest minds and figures that we've ever known. Even when he got to college, he would be staring out the window, and the professors would think that he was daydreaming, and they would kick him out of his class, because he would be staring out the window and then go and answer their questions that nobody else can answer, and they couldn't figure him out. You know what he was doing when he was looking out the window? He was imagining. He was creatively imagining. He did what he called thought experiments, where he would imagine, what would it look like to ride a sunbeam from a beam of light from the sun to the earth. And in that thought imagination, he came up with the theory of relativity. That's right brain thinking right there. And so when we get these right brain thinkers in classes where the teachers are doing nothing but teaching from the left hemisphere, they're going to feel like, one, I don't understand what you're saying. I can't wrap my mind around what you're saying, and I feel like I don't belong. But here's where I want to mention 2 of the other learning styles that are important, Ron, especially for our children. One of the other learning styles that I feel a lot of our children express is the expeditionary learner. The expeditionary learner has to experience the world with their hands in order to process information. But guess what happens when they go put their hands on stuff in the classroom with other people? Hey, keep your hands to yourself. Now you're suppressing their learning style. And they're like, dang, can't do anything here. I can't process the information. The other type of learner is an a kinesthetic learner. Kinesthetic learners have to move around to process information. But guess what happens, Ron, when they get up out their seat and they keep getting up out their seat and moving around? Hey, sit down, be still. Man, you're suppressing my learning style. I feel like I fish out of water. I hate this place. And so I told him, and by the way, I feel like a lot of our athletes are kinesthetic learners, which is why they excel on the court and in the field, because they're allowed to process information in real time to perform and excel at the highest peak that they can. But here's where, so that's only half of the equation. I told these young men, I said, look, if you can understand what your learning style is, and instead of running away from the thing that you hate, you run towards it like David ran towards Goliath, and allow your learning style to become a teaching style. As an educator, you're going to fill in the gaps where the school system has failed us because it doesn't have the full representation of all 8 learning styles. And so when you come into the classroom as a kinesthetic learner and you're presenting things in a kinesthetic way, you're going to engage another kinesthetic learner who will otherwise be marginalized. And now we're beginning to fill in the system, and we're beginning to fix the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think when you start thinking about genius and looking at the different styles, I think teachers or educators are only taught or have exposure to a limited amount of styles. So even in schools now, that everybody's taught to test.
Yep.
Academically, so they're not necessarily critical thinkers, or they're limiting the ability for people to critically think and figure out different ways. So I think most of our kids are just kids in general are taught to pass so many exams and tests that's proctored, and we're measuring our kids by can they pass a test.
Yep, which is a logical perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's putting our kids in a position that's unfair to them. So you don't really get to see what they're actually good at, because we're testing them for everything, and we're measuring them just simply by a test.
Yeah, I mean, these Montessori schools are starting to get it and understand it. They are more prone to tap into these different learning styles, and I feel like the school system needs to be reformed completely to have the right learning style teacher paired with the right classroom that's full of those type of learners, so that the impact is maximized. And the thing of it is, this approach to systems is not just relevant in the school system, it's relevant to every system where human beings are involved. Because we get on jobs, and some people feel like fish out of water, like, hey, I got put on a performance plan, but you don't understand how I thrive. You don't, and are you even trying to understand? Or are you just trying to get me to conform? You're trying to put a square peg in a circular hole, right? And so this is revolutionary to me, because now the very thing that they've dismissed, these kids have been programmed to dismiss about themselves, is their tool that they can literally pick up to use to fix the system or to fix the thing that they hate. And so that brings us to the second component of the equation, which is talent, because your talent is your tool that you've been given to fix the thing that's broken in the world, that is traumatized and you feel marginalized in. And in fact, that's your purpose in life, is to discover what is your tool, your talent that you can use to fix the brokenness that has afflicted you in a very specific way. And when we can figure that out, when we can put this puzzle together and orient the pieces in the right way, we begin to unlock our genius.
I mean, when you think about first learning like what your purpose is, what's your passion, and then getting into like how does your talent support what that passion is, so understanding what you're there, what gets you going, and then what do you bring to this table as a which is it's given to you automatically. So talent you don't have to develop. Now, can you develop it? Yeah, absolutely. But I think if you're really operating in your space of subject matter expert, there are a lot of things that I naturally do that I didn't have to develop.
Yep.
It organically happens for me. And there are a lot of things academically I learned that I don't use at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I tell a lot of people that your talent is generational. Like, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not like it just manifested out of you. We recognize that when we look in the entertainment industry, when we look at athletes, we see athletes beget athletes, entertainers beget entertainers, and we recognize it. We're like, oh yeah, they come from a family of whatever. But we fail to turn that lens to ourselves and say, well, what does my family generate? What comes out of this family, right? Are we cooks? Are we writers? Are we authors? What is it that we've been doing? Maybe our forefathers, because of a lack of resources and exposure, didn't get a chance to fully develop the talent that was within them. But guess what? That talent just gets passed right on to the next generation, who has more opportunities and more chances to develop what's internal within them. I always think of Moses, right? Moses, when God began to tell him, like, look, I want you to go free my people, he was like, not me, Lord, I stutter. He was like, all right, fine. I'm gonna send you your brother. He was like, yeah, but he kept coming back to his failures or his shortcomings. And then eventually God was like, dude, what's in your hand, man? And Moses was like, I just got this staff. He was like, put that staff on the ground. He put it on the ground, it turned into a snake. And he said, pick it up by the tail. When he picked it up by the tail, it turned back into a staff. And the message was, you have everything you need in your hand.
Yes.
And the talent that a lot of times goes undiscovered or unappreciated in families is the thing that's common to us. They were like, oh, well, it's just this. And it's like, no, that thing in you is precious. It might not operate in somebody else, but in you is precious. And I'm gonna go back to even the story of David and Goliath, because you know what happened once David said, I'll take him on. The king said, hey, look, okay, you want to take him on? Go, hey. And this boy was like 13 years old, David. And this grown man, Saul, said, hey, go put my armor on and face Goliath. And David was like, no, don't give me that. You'll get me killed. Like, that's your armor is for a grown man. That does not fit me. He said, what you need to do is let me get my slingshot, though. Because he's like, I've killed lions and bears with this slingshot protecting my daddy's sheep. And that slingshot is a symbol of our talent. Like, we got to know what fits good in our hand. What do we know how to wield? He's like, give me 5 smooth stones. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with this giant. Don't give me your armor. And so that again, it gets back to other people viewing us from the outside saying, hey, you'd be good at that. You need to do this way. And if they don't have your best interest in mind and they're not truly peering into you and looking at you for who you are, then we shouldn't listen to them. We should not allow someone to dictate to us what our talent is. I walk around and, like a week ago, somebody was like, yeah, you play basketball, right? Like, no, I didn't. Just because I'm tall and black doesn't mean that that's my gift. When I was in college and I had this engineering degree and I went and got my scholarship, they was like, oh, you here for football, right? No, sir. I'm here for my academics. I need you to step outside of yourself and see me for who I am and not for who you just want to be prejudiced to exclude me to be.
Yeah,
right.
I think as we look at, I think that happens in a lot of organizations or society as a whole, that we tend to box people in
Yes.
based on what we would like for them to be, or what we need them to be. And I think often we will get people to do this, even for the work that we do. There are clients that will want us, when they brought us in, we come in to do what we do, and they see a problem that they have or something they need, and they want us to be able to address that, even though it's not what we do well. Mm-hmm. But because they have the problem, they want us to be the solution to it. And I don't think, for me, I don't want to be the solution for what they think I'm supposed to be the solution for. I actually want to be working in the space that I'm supposed to work in. Yes, and if I naturally fit into that solution, that's great. But I don't want to force me to fit into, just because anybody that has a problem, they just want the quickest pain medication.
Right. Right. And that's important. And that gets into, again, knowing your zeros and nines. The geniuses aren't good at all things, and they got to know where they fit in and where they don't, and have the power to say, like, nope, you need somebody else for that.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
As we begin to kind of bring this interview to a close, I just want to focus on you specifically, Ron. What is it that you're passionate about? Specifically, what is it that you hate?
Hate is a strong term, so I probably would say strongly dislike. Okay. I'm probably like the young people you interview, where, I don't think there's anything that I hate per se. I think if I was to say something that I hate, it would be racism.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but what do I really feel like that I'm passionate about is making a difference for other people. But at the end of the day, what do I get up for is to add value and make a difference. And I do that in many ways, but at the end of the day, I'm always going to ask myself, and I'm always going to be excited about, did I do something to make a difference? Mm-hmm. If I was to transition today, you can make a eulogy out of that. The only thing you wanted you to know about him is he made a difference.
Sure. Yeah.
It wouldn't be everything. There are a lot of things that are important, but I don't know if there's anything outside of my faith that's more important than, hey, I spend all of my time, 90% of my time, whether it's cooking breakfast, or whether it's watching a car, or whether it's doing a speech, or whether it's writing a speech, or whether it's doing an interview, it's all about making a difference. At the end of the day, I can equate everything to me is, how do I make a difference?
Yeah. I see you walking in your genius, Ron, which is one of the reasons why I brought you on the show. And I'm glad that I know, like I said, that hate is a really strong word, But if you're going to reserve a strong word for a strong passion, racism is one of them, right?
Yes,
If you're going to hate a thing, hate something like racism, because I think that you, because of your exposure, you've seen some things that lets you know we don't have to function like this. You've been
absolutely.
exposed to the army where army of one. It don't matter what you look like. It don't matter what your color is. We have a uniform goal. And that's why even the uniforms, the buzz cuts are the way they are, the uniforms are the way they are, so that you begin to realize that we're one many members but one body, and you
Absolutely.
see what it looks like to function beyond race, to function beyond what makes us different on the surface. And you're like, if we can do this fighting wars, we can do this in the business
It,
place, we can do this in industry, we can do this outside of what you saw, where you saw it function. And I think that drives you.
yeah, it does drive me. I think for me personally, it's because I've done it in so many places. And what probably drives it more than anything is when I watch where we are, what we do, like faith, even in my own community, my ethnic group, there are 7, 8, 15, 28, whatever the number is today, denominations.
Mhm.
But we all serve one God. But we can't become uniformity to say that, we all, I mean, literally, we literally bully each other in the religious space,
You do.
whether you're Methodist or whether you're Protestant or whether you're Baptist, or Protestant, whatever that thing may be. We almost look like if you're not Baptist, you're not really doing what you should, or if you're not Protestant, you're not. So that part frustrates because I come from a religious background of a lot of ancestors that have been pastors, but I've always seen us, even the spiritual, true believers in Christ, struggle in coming together as what God has always intended us to be, like
Yeah.
one body. And so racism plays into that. Where you live at plays into that, and what title you're attached to. They'll want to give Jesus a title, what he was religious, but at the end of the day, he died for all.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then so for me, it does. When I'm faced with racism, that's a place that puts me into a place where, okay, I got to do something about it, and I have done that. And people will tell you that, like, most of my conversations and most of my talks, I will speak against racism in the Black community as much as I'll speak about it in the white community, because there's racism in the Black community
There is.
amongst each other. So
At the,
that's the one thing that I do feel like, I grew up in an all Black community and watched things happen, that I decided I was going to. That was the one thing that gave me passion and fuel, and I started speaking against it in ninth grade and been speaking against it since. Equality, I mean, is important for me.
yeah. Inequality and prejudice are the base of racism, right?
Yes.
When inequality is informed by prejudice, and
Yeah.
prejudice is informed by, everyone has discriminatory thoughts. When we go into a place, we're trying to assess the environment to make sure we're safe, and we put labels on people. But once you meet a person, it's your job to take off the label and meet them for who they are, instead of letting the label define who you need them to be, like I said, to make your world make sense. And even when I said, we're many members, one body, that was an allusion to, 1 Corinthians 12, which talks about how, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. Each has a value that it adds to the body, that without it, the body doesn't function correctly. It's dysfunctional. And that's
Yes.
what we see in religion. That's what we see in that division. So I understand that. Now, what would you say your talent is? And when you answer that question of what your talent is, can you just tell the people, I know what you do for a living, and I'm going to put DENI out there, but can you tell us what your talent is, and then tell us what DENI is and how you fit into that picture?
I think my greatest talent is connecting with people
Yes.
at the end of the day. I think that's my greatest talent, where everyone that I build a relationship with, it's an authentic connection. So I think I'm a connector of people, and I can connect with people regardless of all backgrounds. I can literally do well with connecting with people. It's a gift for me. And the work that I do is really working with leaders and organizations, in all industries, to help leaders be better leaders, to take care of the people they're responsible for. Created a winning environment and a winning culture that people want to be a part of. So do people want to come to your church? If they have one leader to choose, would they choose you? And if so, why? And I want people to understand why people choose to follow you. You can get promoted. It doesn't mean I follow you. It just means I report to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I work hard with leaders to define, some characteristics, some qualities about themselves that people want to report to. You know, I can think of leaders that I will work for any day, all day. And I can think of leaders I never ever hope I get cursed to have to work for.
So just for the people, DENI is a large part of this, even how we met through the work
Yes.
that you're doing on my wife's job. And so can you just let us know what those acronyms stand for? DENI is.
Yeah, DE&I is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they've added to it too on there when you look at it, Reggie. There, I mean, it changes, and it should change because we're learning more, we're figuring out more, we're becoming smarter about it. But even in the DE&I space, there's still people that feel like they don't belong. So they're
Mm,
starting to figure out, and you know, when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you got to change your behavior to make me feel like I belong. So, you know, when we met, we're sitting at the table, and it was the first time meeting you. There's a way that we should behave to make you feel like you wanted to be at that lunch, that you didn't feel like an outcast. You know, I met your wife before I met you. You know, my wife didn't meet you guys, and so we knew that it was important, even when we spoke to your wife and I was sitting down. It was important for us to make sure y'all felt belonging in the relationship and the conversation. And that's a part of belonging because you don't want anybody to feel like an outsider.
right.
It's not healthy. So I thought I knew it was important to bring Linda into the conversation, and your wife knew it was important to bring you into the conversation, and say, hey, we're going to be building this professional relationship, but we want our families to belong and know each other and have that bond connection across the board. So no matter where we are, it's something that if you know it, you begin to build with and you begin to respect it, and it's a nice, cordial, and professional thing. So belonging is huge. I think we've gotten away from even in church. People feel like they don't belong.
Yep.
Like I
Yep.
literally watch people come to church and feel like that fish climbing the tree.
Like not get spoken to because everybody's in their cliques. And
They
yeah,
don't. They're not dressed like the normal church people dress, or they're not singing the songs, or they're not speaking in tongues, or they're not clapping it, or they're not standing, or they're not putting it. I mean, just this thing of what we think a Christian's supposed to look like. We
right, right.
really put people in a role of what I'm not sure what a Christian is supposed to look like, to be quite honest.
Yeah. What I hear you saying is that you are one who advocates for dismantling alienation. And what I began to see of you as you began to describe, your talent and with the background of what I see your passion is, I began to see like a patchwork of like a quilt coming together. And the quilt, the more diverse the patches are that are contributing to the quilt, the better the quilt, because it's all about representation of all walks of life, of all things. A quilt is not a quilt if it's uniform throughout. If it's like one, that's a blanket. Blanket is different from a quilt. Quilt has different meaning. A quilt brings in multi generations, right? A quilt brings in different fabrics and lets you know that they can be cohesive and if they're woven together in the right way. But what I see in you, Ron, is you're not just one who creates quilts by yourself. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Like like okay, I can give you the blueprint for how this quilt should be put together, but you're a seamstress. You do this better than I do. You provide the textile. Let's bring in the seamstress and the person that has the textile product and make this work in the environment. I see the workshop that a quilt will be built in is what you have been placed to bring together the different people to come and say, okay, first of all, how can we create this quilt together? And then two, how can we reproduce it so that this quilt and this mindset is reproduced in different areas and can function long after you're gone?
Yeah, I think that's important for me. I truly believe I have never met in my entire life someone that didn't add value to the world. I've never met that person, like ever, that didn't add value somewhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it may not be in my world, but I've never met them where they didn't add value somewhere in the world.
Yes.
And since I see them as that human that adds value somewhere, a part of my journey is let me figure out where they add value and put them in the best place. So let me put this fish back in this water that they can actually add value, or let me put this bird back in this tree, or let me put this human back where do they add value? And it may not be in my direct space where I benefit from it, but if they benefit from it, it's perfect for me.
Yeah.
So
I
I think
see
a part
this
of my
quote.
journey is being able to make sure that people can where do they fit on that quilt? Because it's important, like that each little patch goes at a certain place on that quilt, and it's not to be meant to be in whoever I may find it most comfortable. It may be in the most odd place ever, but it's where they adds the most value on the quilt.
Yeah. You hear me? I said, I see you using this quote now. Like they got to be this fish out of water. I love it. So Ron, this has been a great interview. I really appreciate the time that you took and the insight that you provided in adding to just the concept of understanding that genius is about a collection of things and being able to see it in yourself and to bring people in on being included and feeling like they're not alienated in the things that they bring to the table as well. I look forward to chopping it up with you more next week. And I want to thank you again for being my genius guest on this show, which has been Inkwell Spoken Presents Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny. And Ron, it's my uncommon cue to see the genius in you.
Thank you, Reggie. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me as a guest.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Make sure you pick up the book, Common Genius, Uncommon Destiny, by my dad, Reggie Legend, available on Amazon and at inkwellspoken.com. Connect with us at Inkwellspoken on all social media platforms. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.